In this presentation, I will look at how the discourse around bilingual cognitive advantages began, what some of these proposed advantages are, and I'll highlight the factors within bilingual populations that influence the likelihood of these advantages being present. Bilingualism is the ability to process two languages, which 43% of the world's population can do. Unlike monolinguals, bilingual language use is intimately tied to cognitive systems, where they can switch between representational systems of languages while avoiding interference. This ability is controlled by the brain's general executive control system. This system is what regulates and guides cognitive processes in aspects like sensory and memory. Further studies since 1984 have shown that both languages are generally activated in bilinguals, even when the context is biased towards one. These factors lead to many hypotheses we see today about bilinguals having cognitive advantages in areas like inhibition, attention control, and working memory. However, this wasn't always the case. Before 1962, studies actually found bilingualism to be negative. But why did they come to this conclusion? Well, one reason is, in their bilingual samples, they failed to control for factors like socioeconomic status as well as proficiency in the testing language. So, this led to them not fairly matching up their bilingual and monolingual samples. Also, earlier studies used intelligence tests, which stem from eugenic practices and are not the greatest measures for cognitive processing tests, since they are largely dependent on memory. The first study to actually find bilingualism to be positive was Peter and Lambert in 1962. They were comparing the verbal intelligence of monolingual and bilingual French and English speakers and found bilinguals to have superior performance in concept formation and greater mental flexibility. But why did they come to such different results? Well, Peter and Lambert did not repeat the methodological flaws of previous studies. They made sure to create a distinction within their bilingual samples of second language proficiency, which improved the quality of their sample because it only included balanced bilinguals who had equal proficiency in language 1 and language 2. They disregarded all pseudo-bilinguals, which at the time were included as bilinguals, and they were children whose parents were immigrants and whose parents spoke other languages, as well as children who were taking foreign language courses. Also, Peter and Lambert made sure to match participants on socioeconomic status. This helped control for differences between the usually poorer bilingual children and the wealthier monolingual children. Also, Peter and Lambert was the last study to use intelligence tests. Due to the cognitive revolution, a paradigm shift occurred, where standardized tests of intelligence as the main outcome measure were abandoned. Now research on bilingualism focuses on cognitive processing tasks. This refers to higher order processes that allow one to flexibly adapt to particular tasks and changes with experience, expertise, and development. Well, what are some of the advantages in cognitive processes that bilinguals have? Studies that have significant results show that bilinguals outperform monolinguals at executive functions like task switching, visual and spatial memory, inhibitory control, working memory, and many more. However, there have been numerous studies that haven't been able to replicate these results, which calls the question if these advantages are actually widespread, or even if these advantages are coming from bilingualism. I'm interested in looking at the factors within bilingual populations that lead some studies to get results that show bilingual advantages, while others do not. One of the most extensive studies on bilingual advantages has been inhibitory control. In the minds of bilinguals, both languages are jointly active, so they are constantly suppressing one and while processing the other, and blocking out distracting information. It is an extremely plausible idea for this constant inhibitory work to strengthen general executive functions. Even within this corner of bilingual research, though, there are significant factors within bilingual populations that contribute to varying results. One of these factors is proficiency. It is important for studies to continue to make sample distinctions based on proficiency in language 2, because to describe someone as bilingual, there needs to be a sufficient level of language 2 proficiency, which Peter and Lambert pioneered. Also, studies that look at differences within bilingual populations of varying L2 proficiencies are able to contribute more to the discussion on how bilingual advantages develop, since their comparison makes an argument of how bilingualism contributes to different executive functions, rather than just looking at if it does possibly contribute to executive functions. Another important factor to consider is age, because it's really plausible that bilingualism will interact with people's linguistic and cognitive abilities in different ways over their development. For inhibitory control studies, they have a difficult time seeing these bilingual advantages in young adults, whereas these advantages are commonly seen and reproduced in middle-aged and elderly bilingual populations. Researchers argue this is because the bilingual advantage may not be easily detected in young adults, since it is the age where humans are at the peak of their cognitive abilities, whereas in older populations, they are more likely to be experiencing cognitive decline due to the old age, and it may be easier to detect how bilingualism impacts their cognitive abilities when compared to their monolingual counterparts who are also experiencing cognitive decline. And in the studies with children, there are conflicting results where some studies see advantages at certain ages while others do not at other ages. Of course, children are still developing their cognitive and linguistic abilities, so it may be easier to just detect these advantages at certain periods of development over others. Another one of these factors is socioeconomic status. As we saw in the studies before, like Peter and Lambert study, it's necessary to control for socioeconomic status to ensure that confounding variables are not affecting the likelihood of bilingual advantages within samples. However, how studies should control for socioeconomic status is debated. Many studies use neighborhood median income or educational level as indicators to match socioeconomic status. However, the validity of these indicators for matching is questionable for different populations like young adults. However, it is still extremely necessary to ensure that participants are matched on socioeconomic status and is consistent across studies because it helps avoid conclusions being drawn by researchers that are the byproduct of compounded individual differences but are not a true reflection of group differences between language groups. The last factor I want to discuss is how usage and language environment of bilinguals plays a part on the extent of their cognitive advantages. There's this framework called adaptive control hypothesis, which focuses on how bilingual language use can shape both language control and executive functions depending on their language environment. For example, someone who's in a controlled dual language environment where they need to switch languages within conversations or when speaking to different people will develop stronger inhibitory control skills than someone who freely switches between languages with other bilinguals who speak the same. Clearly, there's a difference in how cognitive advantages will affect different populations of bilinguals. And these advantages need to be paid close attention to when designing these experiments so that we can truly understand the extent of how bilingualism influences these cognitive advantages.